Mojo Monday, Rick Hale. How are you?
I'm doing incredibly well. And by the way, if you want to hear the rest of that song, it's got a great upbeat vibe. It's Ty Verdes and A-OK is the song. So
A-OK. We
because
love it.
we're
All right.
A-OK and hope you are too.
It is Mojo Monday, my favorite time of the week, Rick. We do these for motivation conversations, mindset conversations, just to set the stage for a great week. And we're in the middle of our negotiation series. And today's topic is really buy-in and tie downs. But I think there's a layer to this conversation, Rick, which is emotion and emotional state. So why don't you set us up for our conversation today?
Well, I think the starting place for the conversation should be why does your client need you? I mean, what's the purpose in being, a subject matter expert in representing someone? I mean, with technology and the internet, I mean, there's so much information out there that, there was a time when the internet really blew up. I've been in this business now 25 years where there was a little bit of undercurrent concern that the internet was going to give everyone everything they needed to know to go about their business, and transacting homes or transacting anything for that matter would be as easy as Chat GPT today or the internet
Oh
and
yeah.
Googling. But what really actually showed up, Brett, is that with the emergence of more information, things became cloudier and more challenging to navigate, because now you have to also carry a suspicious thought in your head. Well, that's good information, but is it sincere and valid, or are they trying to sell me something? Because we all know the power of the internet really lives and dies by its ability to generate income from advertising. So,
100%.
so it comes back to trust. That's the deal. Who do you trust?
Yeah. You know, the value proposition of any sales business, any sales organization always evolves over time. And what I'm hearing you say is the value proposition of the real estate professional has certainly evolved in the 25 years that you've been in the industry, and I've been in the industry 24, and I've watched it myself, right? Like data was a big part of our value proposition, and the internet changed that. Data is not specifically our value proposition these days, yet what is? And we should get clarity on that. And I think the clarifying question is, why have representation in the first place?
Yeah.
Like if I'm a consumer, why do I need representation?
So to me, there's two key answers to that question, Brett. One is going to be expertise. You're going to have, market knowledge, local industry standards and practices. You're going to have to understand how to navigate, not only vetting properties, finding the property, showing the property, access to properties, and then writing contracts, of course, and then the nuances of the legal system, the structure around, due diligence and inspections and appraisals, and all of these, floodplain, no floodplain, structural material defect. There's so many things that make you valuable. And one of the cautionary things that I would push out there, though, is that we tend, the wiser you get, the more likely you are to withhold every step of the way under the guise, or the, trying to make it easy or less stressful on your clients by, like the magic's behind the curtain. But I've learned this along the way too, that if you don't demonstrate, some of the hurdles you're jumping behind the scenes, you might be perceived undervalued or not recognized as the subject matter expert you are. And it's not about delivering that in this, a bold egocentric way, but it's doing it still in a humility rich way. But make sure, man, I mean, what's your story, and who's hearing it and who's able to retell it? And if they can't, then you're not illustrating value at the highest possible level. And it's that value transaction between parties that creates that bond or trust. And the other reason to have representation, and maybe even in some cases equally important, is that you have the ability to navigate really
Yes.
high stress, high emotion rich transactions or conversations in an unemotionally attached way, so that you're not perceived vulnerable and people don't read you, or you can play your cards more strategically, where when it's you in the transaction, and I know this from experience, and you've bought houses, it's a different story when it's your money on the line. It's easy to think that you're intellectually bound. Hey, this is my area of expertise.
Oh.
But man, all of a sudden, man, you're up at night scratching your head going, am I blowing it? What am I doing? And emotion starts to
And why
create
am I
havoc,
emotional when
right?
I tell everybody else not to be? But I think what I'm hearing you say is people, when they engage an agent, are looking, underlining conversation. I want you to help me make a great decision.
Right.
And I want you to guide me. I want you to manage me. And I want you to help me at the end of the day make a great decision and feel good and communicate to me through the process, right? So we started saying, oh, this is about tie downs and buy in and that kind of a conversation, which kind of speaks to the end of the transaction, like the contract portion. Yet it's really not. It's actually along the way. And where those typical phrases or those phrases speak to is emotional motivator. And as much as we don't want emotion inside of a conversation, it's actually a good and a bad force inside of a transaction, right? But I think if I'm a real estate professional or I'm an agent to a consumer, I do need to understand their emotional motivators, because ultimately, if I'm tying down a conversation or getting buy in, I'm speaking to that emotion to get the agreement, right?
Right. So this is interesting. You just brought back a memory back when, when I was doing a lot of heavy lifting and working with buyers and sellers and as well. I would often say, I'm emotionally attached to you. I'm not emotionally attached to the transaction. And I want there to be a clear distinction, because when I'm emotionally attached to a transaction, just like when it's you buying your own personal property, Brett, there's an energy that people can feel when there's anxiety or anxiousness or man, there's nothing more powerful than the ability to walk away from a transaction and not illustrate emotion around that. Fear is a much greater motivator, and people can sense fear and they'll attack if they're in tune and
Sure.
intuitive to that energy. But I always wanted my clients to be clear. I'm emotionally attached to you, not the transaction. I only want the transaction to occur if it's a win for you. And so,
Yeah.
it's that whole silly saying that, what station do your clients listen to nonstop? What radio station is WIIFM? What does
Yeah.
that stand for?
What's in it for me?
That's right. As much as you'd like to think they're reciprocal and love you as much or more than you love them, I wouldn't get hung up on that being true, because ultimately there's a lot on the line and they have to know that you're willing to lead the charge. If at any point in the transaction, what they were buying into and what really satisfied their needs and wants, all of a sudden, if that's no longer applicable, you're not just walking away, you're running and you're carrying the flag, dragging them with you, because the transaction's not worth the relationship. And if they feel that energy, they'll continue to trust you, so that if you do apply, tie downs and buy-ins, that's almost a scripted scenario using neurolinguistics and the ability to communicate effectively, so that someone confirms their own thoughts out loud. That's really all you're trying to do. Say, hey, well, based on the things you've told me about this purchase, is there any reason you shouldn't move forward at this point in time? Or
Right.
what's missing that would slow you down or prohibit you? These are all tie downs. You want them to say yes, or even a no answer that's a yes. It's a yes answer with a no response is an interesting way. Like, would you be offended if I went ahead and delivered an offer on your behalf? Because this seems to check all the boxes. And the answer is no, but it's a yes answer. That's another strategy. And
Yeah.
those work and they're great, but they only truly resonate if it comes from a heartfelt place where they feel your energy is really unselfishly serving their need.
Yeah. And there has to be trust in that relationship for that to work. If I don't know you, we've never built a relationship, we don't have any rapport, and I ask you those questions, I actually am repelling our trust relationship instead of moving into that trust relationship. There's another layer to this, Rick, which one, we kind of want to understand the client's emotional motivators, and we want to make sure we have clarity around that so we can tie down to that. We can get buy-in from that. And you're right, it is a scripted scenario that you should practice. However, sometimes our emotions get involved. And what I'm hearing you say is, I'm emotional for you, not for the transaction. Yet, in my experience, I've watched many of professionals over the year get really emotional about the transaction. What's the advice around that?
you don't have enough quality clients and enough quality transactions. For
You're
me, as long
smelling
as
money, right?
yeah, it typically does come back to your ability to sustain your lifestyle or hit your goals. And so when it becomes personal, they feel it and it feels disingenuous and it feels self serving. And that eliminates a layer of trust that when you do apply a little bit of leverage, either using a scripted strategy or some way to get them to own their truth, it feels disingenuous. And it's like, we've talked about this in one of the prior episodes of negotiating, where if I ask you to put your hand against mine and I start pressing, the minute I start pushing on you, the human experience is to push back.
Yeah.
You just, no one likes to be pushed. Everyone's happy to be pulled through something that favors them and serves them at the highest level. And I think the key is to anchor them to their truth. Anchor them to their truth. And the only way to do that is to ask probing questions, dig deep, build trust, and then be willing to walk away. As soon as they know you're willing to walk away and that the transaction is not worth the relationship, that level of trust, it blossoms.
Absolutely. So I was thinking, just as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation today, like what is the message that I think people should hear this morning? It's really a message of check-in, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
check in with yourself in a negotiation. Do you understand your client's emotional motivators? Are you able to be in a relationship in a position of trust that you can tap into those? But also, you should check in with yourself and say, am I emotional for my client or am I emotional for the transaction? And they're very different emotions. And you should always be asking yourself that question, because sometimes realtors or any sales professional will blow up a deal because of their emotional state, not really the client's emotional state.
Well, that's a huge factor. We've all been in transactions before where we felt like the other agent was manipulating the narrative. And because of that, their client was led astray from the ultimate goal. And that's a meeting of the minds and people coming together in a win win way. And so I will share this, Brett. It is impossible at times not to feel emotional energy around a transaction you've worked hard for.
Of
And,
course.
but the secret is not that you feel it, is that you take a deep breath, recalibrate, reset, get your intellectual head back in the game before you re-engage in a conversation with a cooperating agent or your client. Don't let their emotion fuel yours. That's the
Yeah.
secret sauce to all of this. And pattern interrupt is an incredible strategy. And that's when if you feel emotion rising and all of a sudden the conversation is not going the way you thought, one of two things should happen. One, immediately stop and go, hey, you know what? I think what I'm trying to convey isn't really landing, and I just want to apologize. Can I start over and let's regroup? That's one way to attack it when you feel like a conversation is escalating emotionally. And
Yep.
it's cool when someone recognizes, hey, this probably isn't going the right direction, because once you build a wall between two people around that negative emotion or contentious energy, it's hard to tear that sucker down. The other thing you can do is say, hey, you know what? I think I need to regroup and rethink this. Can I call you back in an hour or two? Or here, last piece of advice, be careful calling your client or a cooperating agent after 6:30 or 7 at night. If you recognize, man, it's not uncommon that someone has a glass of wine or a few, and they may not even be in their right mind. So my best advice, when you feel that energy, go, hey, you know what? I'm a little tired and not 100%. Why don't you give me some time to regroup so that I can present this in a more friendly way, or a way that you might understand me better? Because I feel like I'm missing the target and it's really on me. So own that. The next day, you might pick up the phone and find a completely different person once they've had a little
100%.
bit of pattern interrupt.
I know if you call me in the morning time, like right now, you're going to get a much better version of me than if you called me at 7 o'clock at night. And it's just
Absolutely.
because all the stuff that goes on during the during the day, right? And I hear what you're saying. So the challenge is check in. The
Check in.
challenge is check in. Do you know the emotional motivators of your client? Check in on understanding your emotional state and making sure it's aligned with the trust relationship. Make sure it's aligned with the client's best intentions, and go win the day, guys.
Yeah.
Today is the day. It's Mojo Monday, Rick Hale.
Mojo Monday, guys. We love you. Appreciate you.
Love
Make
it.
it good.
Have a good one.
See ya.
Let me change your mind.